Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Precision Perspectives. It is me, your host, Jordan Yates, marketing engineer at Knowles Precision Devices. Now, today we are back with our guest from episode one, Peter Matthews, the director of technical marketing at Knowles as well. But today's episode is going to be a little different. We are getting into the technology of filters. That is why this episode is called What are filters? So, Peter, welcome back.
Hi, nice to be back.
So, I'm excited personally because Peter and I, as I said, we both work at Knowles. I work a little bit more on the capacitor side, and he works a bit more with the what you consider to be filters. I personally have been doing this for a while, but still struggle to sometimes grasp what filters are. So I am equally excited as everybody else listening today to get a better understanding of filters. Peter, do you feel confident in delivering this message to us?
Fairly, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, okay, then we are going to get into right off the bat, say it plainly, Peter. For those listeners who might be new to RF, microwave filters, all of the above, can you explain in simple terms what filters are and how they function? And if there's something better to call them than filters, just take over.
Okay. So, when we talk about RF and microwave, we're talking about signals that are changing in time, right? So if you looked at a screen, there'd be this wavy line or a very complicated wiggly line. But the point is they're changing in time. And the sort of short version of frequency, right, is if you imagine just a pure sine wave, just a pure tone, and you go up and you come down and you come back again, and you end up where you started. Frequency is how many times does it do that? And usually we do it per second. We call that hertz, right? So a signal that's changing in time has this property called frequency, and the property called frequency is how many times it changes per second. So, okay, cool. So what a filter does is it selects signal or energy. Let's just say it selects energy
Mm-hmm.
in the frequency range that you want, and it tries to suppress or remove energy in frequency ranges that you don't want, right? And so, a good example might be um, you're sat in your living room and you've got your window open, and the person next door starts their motorcycle, and there's a lot of noise from the motorcycle, and it's hard to hear your friends talking. So you get up and close the window. Um, you're filtering the noise. You're 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 focusing on the thing you want to focus on, which is your friends talking, by removing um, the signal you don't want, which in this case is the motorcycle. Now that's sound, right?
Okay.
That's a different kind of um, signal changing in time. And what we do at Knowles is we make things that filter radio frequency or microwave energy. And it basically means the signals are changing very, very quickly, right? So signals measured in kilohertz, which is thousands of times a second, megahertz, which is millions of times a second, or gigahertz, which is billions of times a second, right? So what's an example of a megahertz signal is, I don't know, like Sirius XM, um, right? So there are signals coming from space, and they're going to your car, and you can get, you know, um, cool music in your car, or even better, just your iPhone,
I was gonna say for
right?
the
Your
kids
iPhone,
listening, guys, there used to be this thing called radios in your car.
right?
You didn't just plug in Spotify. No.
Right. Right. No, but so, so we're used to having the internet in our pockets,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can get, you know, I have an Apple Music subscription, and I do plug that into my car, and that's what I listen to. Um, and it's getting to me via radio waves, right? So that's an example of the thing we're getting to get the information, to get the data. We're getting these radio waves going from a cell tower to the phone in your car. And then what the filter does is it helps that entire system only pick up what it's supposed to, um, and ignore anything that might be confusing, right? So your phone has filters in it. The cell tower has filters in it. Or trying to think of another really interesting example of, well, GPS,
Yeah.
right? That's an RF signal, and you need filters to only listen to that signal. Otherwise, your GPS will get terribly confused and you get lost in the woods. Um, so yeah, that's what a filter does. It's an electrical component, so it's an electrical doodad. Usually, there's one input, one output, and somebody will put it in their circuit. If it's, whether the circuit is for phones or for radar or for GPS or whatever, and it helps them clean things up, get the best quality signal that they're after.
So I don't want to assume age by this because I can't remember exactly the time frame this was, but wasn't there like with telephones there used to be something where like you could kind of hop on like a party line and there would be like multiple different calls at once? Like I don't know how old that is because I'm bad at history, but is that related to filtering at all? Like you know what I'm talking about.
I do, and I mean it. Uh, you could use it as an analogy,
Okay, but
right?
it's probably not
And
literally what filters were for. I mean, I'm sure there's not been much research lately because we're so far past that. And for reference, guys, like party lines used to be, you could kind of pick up your phone and there, like you could hear conversations of other people that weren't necessarily like meant for you, if I'm describing that correctly.
yeah, and so a filter would prevent you from hearing something that wasn't meant for you.
Okay.
Um, Cable TV box has filters in it, right? So that you only get the signals that you're supposed to get. Um, it If you're encoding information, so what they do when they're sending a signal over the airwaves or down a cable is earlier I talked about this perfect sine
Yeah.
wave. Well, that doesn't really contain any information. That's just a tone, right? It's just boring. So how do you make it interesting? You mess with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you increase the voltage, or you change the frequency, or you have the frequency going like this. And so when you actually see the signal on the screen, it's a wiggly mess.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the computer at the other end can understand that wiggly mess only if it's getting the wiggly mess that it's expecting,
Okay.
right? So you've got a transmitter and you've got a receiver. And a receiver is built to understand certain kinds of wiggly messes. So you have to give it a filter so that it only gets the frequencies that it's built to understand. If some other energy gets into the system, some voltages, like it could be a squirrel sitting on the cable line, right? It changes the frequency, and the receiver, it's just a lump of hardware. It's not smart. It doesn't know. It just listens. It just takes it all in,
Yeah.
and then you get gobbledygook, right? So you it's I don't know. It's like at the fairground where you're saying you have to be this tall to ride,
Yeah.
right? The filter is saying you have to be this tall to ride, and so little kids can't sneak in and mess the whole thing up, right? It it's giving the system, or even a nightclub, right? If you're not on the list, you're not coming in,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the filter is the guy at the door telling you can't come in because you're not on the list, you're not well dressed
I
enough,
hate that
right? That's
guy.
what the filter's doing. Yeah, I know. He's a nuisance, but he's doing his job. And that's what a filter does, is it rejects things that aren't supposed to be there and lets through what is supposed to be there,
I
right?
imagine there are many filter types that we could get into that can explain which one's meant for which. But
Yeah.
before doing that, I kind of want to ask who should care. That's our next segment of who this is relative to. And
Yep.
although for me, I thought episode one, capacitors are for everyone. They're super cool. I feel like there's almost this real world application sense of understanding filters for many age groups of like maybe even kids who have walkie talkies and they're changing the frequency to be on a secret channel to talk to their friends, up to military people probably who are like trying to send secret electronic warfare stuff. Can you kind of break down to us like this seems like it's relative to a lot of people? Am I on to something, or who should care about filters and their technology?
Yeah. So sending or receiving information, right? Communicating, that's a universal human thing. We all do it. And we do it increasingly with electronic systems, right? And you, you can't really get those to work really well without some filtering.
Mm-hmm.
And, so applications can range from, um, well, if you look at like radio telescopes and some of those amazing, images you can get of distant galaxies or even distant planets now, in order to sometimes getting that signal, getting that information is finding a needle in a haystack.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can do with filtering is you can really, really narrow down and again, only focus on the thing you're interested in. You get rid of all the nonsense. And now, we can see other galaxies thanks to um, basically more and more sensitive technology,
Okay.
right? So you can see into the reaches of space. And then you talked about the military,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a country's ability to defend itself, right, has to do with detecting a threat. I mean, like a missile, and being able to see it a long way away. And the way you see something like a missile is with radar,
Yeah.
right? And the sensitivity, the range of that radar has something to do with what's called the signal to noise ratio, which is how can I push down the noise, the rubbish, and just keep that signal that says there's a missile. The better signal to noise ratio, the longer the range, the more time you have to see that thing coming and figure out what to do. Right? So you've got applications in space, you've got applications in defense, and then modern communications, 5G. You can only um, you can only pack that much information into a radio signal if it's clean. If the system is being told it's okay, you just need to concentrate on this chunk of the signal. I've got rid of all the other nonsense. It's clean.
Yeah.
A filter is like a band-aid, and it tidies up or mops up all the mess. And sometimes radios are their own worst energies, right? Energies. They're their own worst enemies. So you can have a signal that's made inside the radio leaking back into the radio. So then the filter comes along and says, "This is fine. I'll tidy up your mess too." And the filter comes along and it cleans and it cleans and it cleans, and you end up with the pure. But that's the ideal state,
Yeah.
right? The pure signal of exactly what you need to hear, like a pin drop. Um, and yeah, the kids playing with their walkie-talkies. That tuning mechanism it's like a filter. It's not exactly a filter,
Mm-hmm.
but you have the thing, the receiver listening for what it should hear,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, an analogy is, I don't know, water filter.
Yeah.
Okay? You get rid of the pathogens and the stuff you don't want, and you just get the nice, yummy drinks that you do want. I mean, but our filters they're electrical,
Okay.
and they mess with electrical signals.
And so speaking of our filters, aka Knowles Precision Devices, I kind of want
Right.
to get into like the real world examples. Like I feel like what you just said, that's a good like that was a lot of really good examples, but I want to hone in more on the side of like, why would it matter in these real world examples to have a specialty filter that's like, why spend the extra money? Why do the extra engineering? Like, when does it matter to have a filter that's really, really good, that's as close to pure as possible? And like, if you can kind of tie in that why to a more like in-depth example,
Mhm.
I think that would be pretty cool because it sounds like they're in so many applications, but I imagine some are a little bit more critical than others.
Right. So, a critical one is one we touched on, right? Where you've got the radar and it's trying to detect that missile.
Mm-hmm.
And the range, can I see it 1,000 miles away, or where can I see it? Um, that depends on the sensitivity, the signal to noise ratio, and that depends on how good the filter is. Say, okay, great, I'll build a really good filter. And that's where the fun, call it fun, the sort of balance and trade-off in filter engineering comes in.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause you could build a really good filter, but it's enormous, and then it doesn't fit on the ship or the plane. It's too big. Um, or I mean, a great filter would just be, I'm not listening. And it's like, great, now I can't hear the signal I wanted, right? So you're balancing all these things. You're trying to boost the signal you want. You're trying to get rid of the signal you don't want. And ideally, you're making it as teeny tiny as you can. And that's one of the things that, so there's sort of a core brand, if you like, historically, at Knowles Precision Devices called Dielectric Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they figured out that by working with the chemistry of the thing you made the filter out of, you can make it smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where, for the performance you're getting, you've got some of the smallest filters there are, right? And that's a thing. Because
Okay.
then if you can have this very, very sensitive radar that can see a very, very long way and it can see a tiny, tiny missile coming at you, and it's small enough to go on a plane, well, that's pretty cool, right? Um, the most precise, I'm trying to think of the most precise. The most precise is probably radio astronomy.
Radio astronomy. Okay. I feel like
Yeah,
we're shifting into getting into the weeds here. So let's get really
a little
precise.
bit.
Yeah, yeah. Guys, that's our next segment, getting into the weeds. I think we're naturally there. We're in the weeds. Peter lives in the weeds. So Peter,
Yeah.
radio astronomy, what?
So, okay, we've seen the film Contact.
Maybe. I am not I assume some
Jodie
listeners have.
Jodie Foster gets to hang out with some aliens eventually, but um, there's a lot made in that film about these radio arrays, all of these dishes,
Hmm.
right? So when you see so radio astronomy is you're not using light to look at things, you're using radio signals, and you're detecting those radio signals from, gosh, billions of miles away, right? And they're traveling light years to get here. And even though space is mostly empty, there is interstellar dust and planets and things, and stuff gets in the way. So, but by the time a signal actually gets here, it's really, really, really weak, right? So you end up with these huge observatories, which are these big dishes that are really, 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 and I keep saying listen, right? But it's not sound, it's radio waves. Um, and the receivers in those are probably some of the most sensitive receivers there are. Um, there is another end of the scale which we can get to, but in these radio astronomy receivers, I don't know. Think about a telescope or a microscope,
Hmm.
right? You want the best possible optics. You want the best possible, clearest signal, so you can see you can solve all of these mysteries by seeing all the detail, right? And so a radio telescope has lots and lots of components. Um, it's a radio engineering thing where you have what's called a super heterodyne, which I won't get into, but it's multiple stages. And earlier we talked about how the filter comes in and it kind of mops up
Hmm.
mess. Well, each time you do something to a radio signal, you usually have to come in with a filter and clean up any mess you made.
Yeah.
So you'll have a receiver and an amplifier, and then a filter, and then a mixer to change the frequency, and then a filter,
Okay.
and then another amplifier, and then another filter. Because each of these stages makes little spikes or noise that you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And so the filter comes along and it cleans it up, and then they do something and then it cleans it up. So the most sensitive instruments in the world are chock full of filters because they need to be the cleanest possible signal. Um, Another example of a weak signal. Um, so we talked about radar, we talked about radio astronomy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you, you you'll have filtering in an MRI machine,
Interesting.
right? Now, hopefully some people never have to see an MRI machine in their entire
They're
lives.
very
But
big.
if you do know that there's radio physics, right? So what the MRI machine does is it puts you in a very strong magnetic field,
Mm-hmm.
and then it kind of pings you with a radio signal, and then it gets responses depending on what you're made of, right? And you can, if you're really, really clever, like the people that design MRI machines, you can sort of get the strength of what signal came from where, and they can actually make a picture of your body, the insides of you,
Interesting.
by listening. So those receivers are very sensitive too, very, very sensitive. And so there's a lot of filtering that happens in those different frequencies.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because the transmitter wouldn't necessarily, it's more of a natural transmitter there because we're transmitting something, or is there like something passing through you? Like, what are they pulling? I mean, maybe we're too far into an application now, but it's interesting.
So all right, I'll try and do this. So when you put um, atomic nuclei have a property called spin,
Uh-huh.
which is to do with spooky quantum mechanics. And if you put atomic nuclei in a strong magnetic field, which is that big donut that you go in, it's like you can actually tilt the spin,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then what you do is you come along with a radio signal and you poke it. And the analogy I use is like you've got a marching band on a football field, you chuck a football at them and watch them scatter. That's what happens, kind of,
Okay.
right? You've got all these spins lined up, but the trick is when they move and then move back again, they release a little signal.
Okay.
There's a little bit of energy that comes out that you can then detect and say, oh, I know there's a hydrogen atom over there,
Interesting.
right? Yeah, it is quantum mechanics in action, but yeah,
Huh.
but the machine is quote unquote talking to the atoms
Okay.
using radio signals, um, and it's all to do with what frequency and what energy and things like that, and filters to the rescue, right? Because then you can sort of say just these. Um, yeah,
If the listeners were not convinced filters were cool yet, they are now. But I think to,
or the complete opposite.
I think to drive it even in more, I kind of want to get into sort of our rapid fire round fun portion. And I didn't personally think to bring this up, but I'm going to say you brought it up first. You mentioned aliens. You lightly touched on it. But I kind of want to get into sort of like a fun, unexpected fact on like the microwave RF side. And maybe it's like an unknown application, but I almost, this is a second tier question here of when people are like, oh, I detected a UFO, I detected this, I caught this signal. That's kind of using filters and like those signals, right? When they think that they're like intercepting UFO stuff. Am I onto something or did I get too excited?
Well, you have to keep it quiet, otherwise no. Yeah, I mean, when they're detecting signals,
Mm-hmm.
they're using filters. Yeah, absolutely. Right? Um, they're zooming in, so to speak, on that portion of what we call the radio spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all these different frequencies that they happen in nature or they happen artificially, and different physical processes create signals at different frequencies, and you can use a filter to zoom in on the signal that you're interested in.
So if we were to
So
go
yeah,
back to the very beginning of this episode and ask who should be interested, alien spotting enthusiasts should have probably been in the categories.
they're on the list. Yeah, yeah, alien hunters.
Alien hunters. Well, guys, filters are literally for everyone. If you didn't believe it before, you believe it now. But Peter, as we're
Definitely.
getting close to the end of this, I'd like you just to kind of like wrap up and drive in one more time, kind of like what we covered of what are filters, and then just hone in a little bit more on the like why they're specialty ones, and kind of tie that back to Knowles of like why these specialty ones exist, and just kind of give us one last hurrah summary.
So, there are different kinds, there are different ways of being special, right? Just like people, filters are special in all kinds of different ways. And we talked about how well they perform and how good they are at squishing signals that they don't want, right? And that's good. But the other really cool thing is about what our company does is we make filters that are so special that you can put them on a rocket, you can send them into space, you can send them hurtling through space, they can go through the 7 minutes of terror, they can land on the surface of Mars, and they still work. And so we've had multiple filters on multiple Mars rovers. So there's cute little robots that are driving around doing stuff on the surface. They've been beaming their signals back to us through Knowles filters, and that's really cool.
That sounds pretty special to me.
It is pretty special because space. It's a tough place to be, and stuff. Gets very hot, gets very cold, gets all shaky, right? And to have these things that just they're robust and they keep doing their job and they never give up. That is pretty special. Yeah.
Well, Peter, thank you for driving it in on that last example, because I think that kind of is the peak of like specialness in a capacitor's or sorry, a filters. You made it to another planet. You're talking back to us like we're enabling the most cool stuff that human beings are doing right now. And
Yeah.
maybe I say cool on the spectrum of like nerdiness or whatnot. Maybe people think other things are cool. I think it's objectively cool going to Mars, but it's even cooler to be a part of it and be the filter on it. So, guys, I hope you learned something today. And if not, you at least were a little bit entertained, because maybe you already knew everything about filters and you just came here for a refresher. But either way, I really appreciate you tuning in. And Peter, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
if you ever want to chat with Peter about how to contact aliens, we could totally put his email in the description. I'm just kidding, guys.
Please.
But anyways, that is all we have for today. And yes, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Precision Perspectives. I'm your host, Jordan Yates, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.